From heartbreak to anger, the family of a postal worker stabbed to death at a deli is outraged. His killer just accepted a plea deal for 15 years behind bars.
So a couple of months ago on this channel, I told you about a story out of Harlem, New York, where two individuals were waiting online in order to make a deli order. There was a dispute on who was online first. That dispute escalated into an argument, and ultimately the end result of this argument was a fight where Hodge III was stabbed to death by a person called Jaia Cruz, who is a transgender individual. And in my previous video, I discussed how the media was covering up for the attacker in that particular instance, and how I didn't think District Attorney Alvin Bragg's office was going to hold this transgender individual to account. And if you guys will recall, 36-year-old Hodge III was a United States postal worker who was on lunch break at the time that this incident occurred, and Jaia Cruz, we didn't know it at the time, was actually an individual who is known for getting into petty street fights with a bunch of different individuals, has a whole host of issues, again, a lengthy criminal history. Well, guess what? None of that mattered. The fact that Hodge III is a black man doing the right thing in order to provide for his two kids also didn't matter, because Jaia Cruz just reached a sweetheart plea deal that will see Jaia serve 15 years maximum, but in reality, based on the amount of a sentence you're actually expected to serve, will likely see this individual released from probably 7 to 10 years, somewhere in that range. And again, it could be even sooner, depending on how they count Jaia's pre-trial detention in terms of credits for this individual. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the entirety of the case from front to back. And I just want to break down how this compares to other cases that were actually legitimate self-defense cases, and how the district attorney's office under Alvin Bragg pursued those individuals. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
I just felt cheated. Like, my son was murdered. And, you know, I'm just like really frustrated.
Wednesday, 24-year-old Jaia Cruz accepted a plea deal at court for murdering 36-year-old Hodge, a USPS mail carrier. This is Cruz when she was taken into custody back on January 3rd. She pled guilty to first-degree manslaughter and will serve 15 years in state prison. Hodge's mother was inside the courtroom.
You and your family feel slighted with a 15-year sentence?
Yes. Yes.
So there's a couple of things that are important to note for you guys out there in the audience. First and foremost, in reality, these kind of plea deals do happen all the time in this country, and very often the families of the person who is injured and or killed do not support these plea deals. So I'm not just going based off the fact that Hodge III has some relatives that are absolutely livid with this particular deal. I'm going to go off the evidence as we have it presented to us and talk about some of these similar kind of situations and how DA Alvin Bragg has treated those in the past.
According to court documents, Cruz was arguing with Hodge inside a Harlem deli before taking out a knife and stabbing him multiple times throughout his body. The stabbing took place back on January 2nd at 2:30 in the afternoon in front of deli workers and witnesses. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office stating in part, in context of the stabbing death, including the rapidly evolving and escalating confrontation and the other relevant sentencing considerations that are presented, the people have offered a plea to manslaughter in the first degree.
Now, immediately what comes to mind for me whenever we talk about a stabbing that occurred in an uptown bodega, I think of the Jose Alba case. And if you guys are not aware, I did multiple different videos on the Jose Alba case, but essentially it was a Dominican-born immigrant that was behind the counter, and he got into a dispute with a woman whose food stamp card was being declined. And now he said, look, your card doesn't have any money on it, you can't actually get the stuff for free. And she was very angry, so she told him that she would get her boyfriend to come in and attack him based on the fact that she didn't have enough money for her stupid ass purchase. And she was very angry that Jose Alba would take items that she could not afford to pay for back from her, and she decided to summon Austin Simon, who, by the way, should have never been out on the streets in the first place. He had recently assaulted a police officer, and due to the soft on crime treatment from Alvin Bragg's district attorney's office and a combination of bail reform and something called less is more, he was out on the streets despite his violent history. So of course, he gets behind the counter. He begins attacking Jose Alba. Jose Alba, being a 61-year-old man, and again, this is all captured on video that I'm not showing you, doesn't really have adequate means to defend himself physically from this individual. So So he ends up grabbing something that they use to open boxes, and he stabs Austin Simon in the neck, killing him, again, while Austin was trying to drag him into the front of the store. Then the girlfriend who started this whole altercation, who left, summoned her boyfriend to come behind the counter and attack Jose Alba, ends up stabbing Jose Alba, and of course there was merchandise destroyed in the store and all this other crazy stuff. Well, in that particular incident, despite the fact that it was a clear and obvious self-defense case, District Attorney Alvin Bragg charged murder. District Attorney Alvin Bragg asked for a bond that was significantly higher than he asked for in actual legitimate non-self-defense murder cases, and Jose Alba was sent to Rikers Island without even having his stab wounds fully treated, where he got an infection and nearly died from those wounds. However, due to outrage from all these different news outlets, and by the way, Mayor Eric Adams himself, good on him for being right on this issue, the charges were eventually dropped. But again, that was due to the public pressure. But the way the Manhattan District Attorney's Office acted in that situation showed us clearly and obviously that they were for the criminal and against the law-abiding defender. And we saw this again reflected in the Daniel Penny case, where you had virtually every witness attest to the fact that Jordan Neely was threatening people, on the verge of attacking people, and Daniel Penny restrained him because of the threat that he posed. And not only did Alvin Bragg go after Daniel Penny, but he actually went out of his way to not go after a person of color who aided in the restraint of Daniel Penny by giving him an immunity deal to try to get him to testify against Penny so that he can be convicted for defending others. So this seems to be the pattern that Alvin Bragg has. If you are trying to claim self-defense, he is going to crush you. They're going to go after you. And if the individual you're trying to defend yourself against is somebody with a lengthy criminal history, he's going to go after you 10x as hard. So of course, in this particular situation, we end up discovering that it was Jaia Cruz who had the lengthy criminal history. In fact, there are multiple social media videos of this person getting into fights on the streets of Manhattan with multiple different individuals. So we would expect, maybe, just maybe, Jaia Cruz to be prosecuted and that self-defense claim that Jaia was making to be dismissed like all the others. But of course, that's not what happened. It turns out that Ray Hodge III is the one with a pretty clean record. Ray Hodge III is the one with a stable, sensible job, working for the United States Postal Service, actually providing for his kids. So Alvin Bragg went out of his way to bend over backwards in order to give a sweetheart plea deal to Jaia Cruz. And again, I'm not speculating on the motivation of the prosecutors in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. We actually had the prosecutor who is litigating the case in the courtroom against Daniel Penny talk about how an individual who murdered somebody at an ATM for $300, an elderly Asian person, she ended up cutting that guy a break because she felt bad for him because he was in poverty and he had such a sad life and a sad story, and that really made her empathize with the criminal.
So I'm going to give you an example of something that I did with a recent case of mine, and this has never been done in my office. I had a murder case where the defendant did not intentionally kill the victim. He went into an ATM on the Upper West Side and tried to rob an individual. Unfortunately, it was an older individual. He was 86. And in the course of the robbery, he fell to the ground. And as a result, he died. This is, under the law, a felony murder, which is akin to intentional murder. However, when I first got the case, I learned, I took the time to learn about the defendant. And it was a strong case, so it wasn't about a whodunit. I knew immediately who did it. I could prove it. I could take it to trial that day and win it. But it wasn't about that. It was that the more I learned about the defendant and his life and the circumstances, the kinds of things that Jarrell was talking about, that one should take into account the trauma of that individual, I really felt incredibly sorry for him that he had gotten to that point in his life where he felt like there was no other choice but to commit this robbery.
Again, I explain all these different various cases to you so you understand it's not a one-off, it's not an isolated incident, it is not a case of ambiguous circumstances, it is a pattern based on an ideology that is prevalent in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which is career criminals, people who attack other people, violent individuals that the system, by the way, does nothing to remove from the streets. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office will bend over backwards in order to protect you. But defenders and innocent people that are involved in these situations, they face the full force of the law. Now, during the case that we actually had prior to the plea deal, we ended up hearing both versions of events, and I do want you to understand that some of the facts are in dispute. There is surveillance video, and that surveillance video has not yet been released to the public at this moment in time, but I'll show you what the prosecution was supposedly arguing before giving this sweetheart plea deal versus what the defense was arguing.
24-year-old Jaia Cruz walked into a Manhattan criminal courtroom Thursday, handcuffed, their feet shackled, accused of fatally stabbing 36-year-old Ray Hodge, an on-duty U.S. postal worker, on his lunch break. Both the defense and prosecution agree the incident started with an argument inside a Harlem deli over a place in line at the food counter. But a packed courtroom listened to the prosecution and defense detail completely contradictory accounts of what happened next. The prosecution described Cruz as the aggressor who argued with Hodge and, quote, used racial slurs against him before taking out a knife and stabbing Hodge multiple times in the chest and neck, adding Cruz later admitted in a videotaped statement to, quote, stabbing him with a knife she carried for protection.
So the prosecution claims that they have witnesses and surveillance video that said that these people were in the deli at the moment in time. There was a dispute on who was online first. Jaia Cruz ended up throwing a bunch of different racial epithets at the United States postal worker because Jaia definitely needed to get the sandwich order first over this particular individual, and then they get into an altercation. Jaia pulls out the knife and stabs him multiple different times. Now, based on what we've seen by all the different videos of Jaia getting into fights on the streets that I can't show you because of YouTube's terms of service, but I will try to link in the description, this sounds like an accurate depiction of who Jaia Cruz is as a person.
Cruz's defense attorney responded with a completely different characterization of the yet-to-be publicly released surveillance video, alleging that Cruz was backed up against a fridge inside the deli and used the knife to defend herself against Hodge, the alleged aggressor. Quote, he started this. And then after he berates her, he removes his jacket, rolls up his sleeves, and says, let's fight. Adding, Hodge then allegedly used a pair of homophobic slurs. Quote, he calls her a T-word and an F-word.
Now, on the flip side, the defense was putting up the argument that it was, in fact, Ray Hodge III that was throwing epithets at Jaia Cruz, and Ray Hodge III decided to take off his jacket at one point in time and say something to the effect of, let's fight. Now, we know from the Carmelo Anthony case that typically when you're in a regular ordinary physical altercation, again, that doesn't involve a sucker punch or multiple attackers or anything of the sort, then you are expected to engage in that physical altercation with physical force, or it is an assault, or again, you should try to remove yourself from the situation. Now, of course, the defense has it set up in such a way that Jaia Cruz could not get out of the situation, but still, the escalation to deadly force is quite questionable. In fact, this sounds a little bit familiar to the Carmelo Anthony case, although I will point out that even this let's fight kind of deal that was put forward by Ray Hodge III, according to the defense, is not something that occurred in the Carmelo Anthony case. Carmelo Anthony had the knife at the ready and basically said, according to multiple witnesses, touch me and see what happens, baiting Austin to approach, and then stab that individual to death, which is what makes that murder.
After the hearing, Cruz's supporters spilled out of the courtroom.
We love Jaia.
And did not stick around to speak with reporters. But we did hear from Ray Hodge's family.
People shouldn't be violent towards each other regardless. The altercation happened over an argument, and it led to Cruz reaching for a weapon, which wasn't called for. Now either one of them can't go home.
What did you think about the two accounts that you heard from the prosecution and the defense, because they were night and day different?
I mean, I guess he's doing his job to paint a picture, but eventually you'll see the video and be able to make your own determination.
Now look, the reason I played both of those sides is so that you can understand that some of the facts were in dispute prior to this plea deal coming, but remember, you had clear and obvious cases of self-defense where all of the various witnesses sided with the defender that the district attorney Alvin Bragg had pursued to the fullest extent of the law. But in this case, you get a sweetheart plea deal. In this case, suddenly, because you got a trans involved, all of a sudden the death of a 36-year-old father of two is not worth litigating in a court, which I find to be ridiculous from top to bottom. Again, if you changed up the identities in these situations and then made the situation significantly worse for the person who died, Alvin Bragg and his office have shown us that they will go out of their way in order to pursue somebody they know is a lawful defender. But in this case, that's not what happened. By the way, another little bit of a similarity or something related to the Carmelo Anthony case is the fact that there is a GoFundMe involved. Now, the GoFundMe is for Ray Hodge III, again, the father of two, the postal worker who was stabbed because of a dispute over who was online first, and it only raised $20,000 compared to the nearly $500,000 the clearly and obviously guilty Carmelo Anthony ended up raising, which really just goes to show you how all of these black activists actually feel about these kind of situations where they don't actually care about the black life, they don't care about the black person. What they're in it for is whether or not they can pin it on an evil white racist. And in this particular case, you have a Latino person, a trans Latino person initiating the kill, so none of these left-wing activists are even talking or speaking the name of Ray Hodge III, and that's why his fundraiser, which will by the way be linked in the description for his family, is basically dead in the water.
The DA's office confirms it was aware the family was opposed to any type of offer. Rice says she wanted the case to go to trial to get justice for her son, a father of two.
She got off too easy.
With Cruz's sentencing now set for May 28th, Rice and her family are left with no choice but to move forward.
One day at a time. I want Ray to be remembered for the good person he was, the excellent father he was, and I just really want him to be remembered for the good person and the heart he had.
Now look, ultimately, because they have not released the surveillance video, we do not know what happened in this deli on this fateful day of January 2nd to Ray Hodge III. We don't know how the altercation escalated, how it went from verbal to physical, but what we do know is that New York has definitely significantly worse self-defense protections than almost anywhere in the entire country. District Attorney Alvin Bragg absolutely hates self-defense and will pursue the correct perpetrator who kills the correct victim in his mind to the fullest extent of the law while cutting a break for an inconvenient perpetrator, as we saw with a bunch of different cases. So when we examine the plea deal that Jaia Cruz ended up getting, I cannot help but think that justice was not blind in this particular case, and Alvin Bragg said, oh my god, innocent Beba Angel, victim transgender individual, so what if she killed a law-abiding black father who was just trying to order lunch on his break from his job at the Postal Service, by the way, a job that he holds in order to provide for his two sons. Again, if the surveillance video comes out and shows that this is clearly and obviously an instance of self-defense, that it wasn't a provocation situation, and that there was just grounds to escalate to deadly force, I will review that video and change my position, but I really just wanted you guys to understand where we're at in the country, the cases that don't get the attention, the victims that are black that don't matter to these activists, as compared to the perpetrators that they will go out of their way to bend over backwards in order to support, because I think it is absolutely fascinating stuff when you start to examine this. Now, of course, I will leave this up to you guys out there in the audience. What do you think about this particular case? Do you think the trans identity acted as a shield for Jaia Cruz, or do you think that we are dealing with an innocent Baba Angel Aladdin that happens to be transgender? And honestly, I'm just stretching for this whole particular story right now, and we should just condemn the postal worker who didn't appear to do anything wrong based on the evidence presented in this case, and of course based on his previous history. As per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me with support links in the description of the video. This has been me talking about a trans killer getting a sweetheart plea deal. Till next time.